He learned to make himself small. The city taught him to fold into corners, under flickering neon, on benches that smelled of old bread, behind closed shop doors. He slept where he could and moved like weather, unseen, accepted, invisible. People passed him as if he were part of the pavement. Some stepped around him with practiced indifference. Others glanced once and catalogued him in a private register of sorrow. One damp morning he found the twins. A mist lay low over the river, and the courtyard by the old factory was a quiet island. He was scavenging for warmth when laughter, two bright twin notes, cut through the grey. He followed the sound and spotted them spinning in a patch of early light, hands clasped, shoes scuffed, coats too big and patched with careful stitches. He crouched behind a crate and watched. One boy had a gap between his front teeth and a grin that seemed to hold a secret. The other had hair that stood in small, brave tufts. They chased each other, made forts from discarded boxes, turned a rusted drainpipe into a mountain and the cracked pavement into an ocean. The older wrapped a scarf around the younger's scraped knee with a tenderness that did not belong to his years. The homeless boy felt something soft and dangerous stir in his chest, an ache he had learned the hard way to hide. The courtyard became a compass in his days. He returned again and again, learning the rhythm of their play, the little rituals the twins observed, sharing an orange as if it were a royal banquet, saving the last crumb for luck, tying an old shoelace into a crown. Sometimes he left small offerings, a stale bun saved from a dumpster, a paper crane folded with patient fingers. The boys accepted things without questions. They trusted easily in the small, careful way of children who had learned to hold on to what little the world offered. He did not know them, only their names, Max and Eli, murmured between them like secret prayers. No adult ever called for them in that courtyard. He assumed they belonged to some neighbor or a shelter, or perhaps they were runaways. He did not think they belonged to the kind of lives that wore cufflinks and smelled of lemon-scented soap. Then the city noticed. A glossy car pulled up, men in suits descended with clipped measures of alarm, and a photograph circulated, a printed image of two identical boys with the same gap-toothed smile and brave hair. Missing, declared the headline. The billionaire's name appeared in every whispered conversation. A reward was announced, reporters hovered like thirsty birds, and the courtyard swelled with strangers offering helplines and assurances that felt empty to the boys who had known little but the cracked joy of their makeshift kingdom. He watched as officials asked gentle questions and as Max and Eli answered in a patient chorus. Cameras found the courtyard and tried to frame the children's innocence like a souvenir. Then, like a cautious tide, the law moved in. The twins were taken for evaluation and placed into a world of bright rooms and softer surfaces. Photographs of them in new clothes filled the papers. The billionaire, exactly as the city expected, stood at a podium and pledged rewards and gratitude, his voice steady, his face composed like a carefully crafted sculpture. Weeks went by, and the boys became headlines instead of playmates. He missed their small rituals, the way the older traced constellations on cardboard, how the younger hummed when he was worried. When the city turned its attention elsewhere, the billionaire's house remained a looming presence, lawn manicured, gates iron and sure. Rumor unfurled like ash. The city's gossip suggested complications, adoption papers, a family history that was not straightforward, questions that smelled like old money and private grief. One night, months after the first laughter, he found them again. They were huddled behind a pharmacy dumpster, coats less threadbare but eyes wary. New mittens did not erase the way their fingers trembled when a car passed. He sat with them without asking. He offered bread and a tin soldier he had kept. They accepted, surprised, as if they had nearly forgotten the feeling of being met without an agenda. He asked the question adults always ask the world, "Do you ever want to go back?" They nodded toward the courtyard, toward cardboard kingdoms and games invented from nothing. He told them small things: how to fold a boat that would sail in the puddles, how to make a slingshot that never hurt anyone, how to knot strings into friendship. For a moment the three of them were simply boys on a curb, unbothered by the language of money, cameras, and legalities. But the world is a net. A private investigator noticed their bond. He began to ask quiet questions, and a tether pulled taut. Evidence surfaced. A catering van left its gate unattended during a private party, a moment of distracted care that had allowed two small lives to slip into an unguarded alley. The investigator traced the paper trail and found gaps where explanations should have been. The billionaire's grief had been sincere, but it had been incomplete. A revelation arrived like a small, sharp stone. The billionaire's sister appeared with an old box of photographs and a memory that threatened the tidy version of the story. The children's origins were revealed to be messier than headlines. Parentage in the city was sometimes a braid of accident and love stretched thin. The billionaire, stripped of his armor of certainty, began to learn the grammar of apology. He did not ask for reward, but the billionaire offered one anyway, a sum meant to buy distance and loyalty. The homeless boy refused the money. He accepted, eventually, a watch and a job, not a title or a patronizing handout, but work that asked for time and offered structure. He learned to scrub floors until they shone and to plant basil in pots that would sit on the billionaire's kitchen window. He kept his freedom and gained a place to sleep where rain was not a theft of warmth. The twins moved between two worlds. They acquired tutors and wardrobes, but they also returned to the courtyard where paper cranes still floated when the wind agreed. They learned the two languages of life, one spoken with cutlery and curated lessons, the other whispered between cardboard and gutters. The billionaire, awkward and earnest, learned to ask instead of telling. He tried to measure his love in patience, in reading children's books aloud imperfectly and attending to scraped knees without a prescriptive solution. There were moments that felt like miracles, small and tangible. He taught the twins to plant basil from seed and to whisper wishes into the soil as if the plant could remember secrets. They woke to the first green shoots like the opening of a shared secret. He showed them how to mend a shoe with a careful stitch and a knot, how to find shelter when city rain fell sideways. The boys, in turn, showed him how to stack discarded crates into a tower that could be a castle and how to find patterns in clouds that looked like ships. The billionaire's first attempts at closeness were clumsy and loud. He bought puzzles, then sat on the floor and learned how to look at a small face without turning it into a statement on philanthropy. He learned to measure time not in boardroom minutes, but in story minutes. How long it took to build a block tower before it collapsed, and how long it took to comfort a child who had dreamed of rain. He apologized for his mistakes with a sincerity that was both new and overdue. The kids accepted those apologies like growing things accept sun. Neighbors who once slid around him in the street began to nod. A woman who ran the corner bodega slipped him a scarf when frost crawled in the windows. The man who fixed radios taught him how to replace a fuse. The neighborhood stitched itself into a safety net not with flash, but with repetition. Bread handed over each Monday, a shared cup of tea, a lookout who whistled when the boys came home late. Those patterns, mundane and small, became a system of care he had never known he deserved. There were moments of friction. The household staff worried that a man who had lived on the streets could not fit inside their orderly world. Lawyers tightened their prose around custody agreements. The billionaire floundered over paperwork that could have purchased countries but could not buy trust. The twins, meanwhile, strained to understand why one life offered both concierge keys and sticky jam on the floor. They learned to answer with patience and to split their time unevenly and without apology. Work at the house gave him a place and a rhythm. He polished silver until it caught morning light, and he found pride in small responsibilities. He learned how to boil a soup that remembered the flavors his grandmother might have made, and he planted basil that grew into a stubborn, fragrant jungle on the windowsill. Each task anchored him further from the edge he had known all his life. He kept his old corner in the courtyard like a talisman. Some nights he still slept there when the heart of the city felt too loud. The children grew, and with growing came new questions. School introduced new textures of learning, books with maps, teachers with patient ways of correcting, a world organized by schedules rather than sudden need. They still kept Sundays for the courtyard. They would build rocket ships out of boxes and then bring them to the lawn to see if a man with a tie would let them fly. The billionaire stopped giving answers he didn't mean and started asking questions he hadn't asked before. He learned that leadership sometimes looked like humility. Over time, the billionaire's public posture softened. He stopped staging grand gestures and began to participate in small ones, reading at a community center, sponsoring an art class for kids who couldn't afford paints, learning to hold a child's hand without thinking about cameras. The homeless boy, now steadier, sometimes led the crafts activity and taught other children how to build forts from cardboard. He did it without fanfare. He did it because it was what he could give, his learned skill at creating joy from scraps. Years later, on a summer evening when the air smelled of frying onion and cut grass, the twins were almost men in the way children become adults after enough mornings. They ran ahead with scarves trailing. Their laughter had the imprint of both playgrounds and polished kitchens. The billionaire walked with a less rigid posture, hands used to unloved work, fingers softened by small chores. The man who had once slept in doorways moved through both houses with equal comfort. He could set a table and could walk the alley, and both things felt like honest work. They launched a last fleet of paper boats into the river. Each boat carried a folded wish, for school to be a place of wonder, for missteps to be forgiven, for a city that remembered the small people under its feet. The boats drifted, bobbed, and slowly disappeared into the current, carried by the same water that had once hidden them. A passerby might not notice. A camera might not capture the tender longitude of their shadows. But the moment was true because it stayed in them. He had found Max and Eli without knowing their papers, their ledgers, their future photographs. In that ignorance, he had been given the chance to love without condition and without expectation. The billionaire had been given a new curriculum: how to listen, how to be present, how to abide. The twins had been given 2 houses and the freedom to carry both into their grown years. The city continued its noisy trade, but in a dented courtyard, a life had been rewoven with thread that money could not replicate.